MH370.
Flight MH370.
Flight MH370.
Flight 370.
MH370.
Is the biggest aviation mystery of all time the disappearance of Malaysian Airlines flight MH370 about to be solved?
Malaysian 370 is set to Beijing via Pibos Alpha departure, 6,000 feet squawk 2157.
You believe you know exactly where MH370 is?
That's correct, yes.
Across the vast Indian Ocean, where flight MH370 vanished into darkness.
Either it was intentional and someone tried to turn all of those systems off at once, or the pilot was unable to communicate.
Something impossible broke through the static. Deep inside the Inmarsat control center, engineers watched as an unfamiliar pulse flickered to life on their screens, a message unlike any they had ever seen. It wasn't a black box ping or any known transmission code. Yet within the broken data, a single chilling line emerged. They're taking us somewhere. Signal is weak. Not sure we'll survive. After 10 silent years, someone or something had spoken again. Inside the final hours of flight MH370, just after midnight on March 8, 2014, Malaysia Airlines flight MH370, a Boeing 777, prepared for a routine overnight flight from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. The route was familiar and the crew seasoned. On board were 239 people in total, 227 passengers and 12 crew members. The jet pushed back from the gate a little later than scheduled and took off close to 12:42 a.m. Malaysia time. The climb out of Kuala Lumpur was smooth, with radio calls steady and clear. For those first few minutes, everything about the flight seemed normal. At 1:07 a.m., a maintenance data link called ACARS, short for Aircraft Communications Addressing and Reporting System, sent what would turn out to be its last routine message. The ACARS system automatically sends updates about basic aircraft status, like fuel readings or engine performance. Nothing in that final report suggested trouble. 2 minutes later, at 1:09 a.m., the crew confirmed with air traffic control that they were stable at 35,000 feet, cruising northward toward Vietnamese airspace. Then, at 1:19 a.m., came the last words anyone heard from the cockpit. "Good night, Malaysian 370. It sounded calm, like thousands of other handoff calls made every day between controllers. The plan was for Vietnam's controllers to take over as the flight crossed from Malaysian airspace. But about 2 minutes after that goodnight call, the aircraft's transponder stopped replying to civilian radar. A transponder is a small radio device that broadcasts an aircraft's identity, altitude, and speed to air traffic control screens. Without it, the airplane becomes just a faint, unidentified blip. When the signal dropped, Malaysian controllers thought the jet was already in contact with Vietnam. Vietnam's controllers, meanwhile, assumed Malaysia still had it. That brief overlap created confusion that would later delay the alarm. But even though the civilian radar picture went blank, the airplane did not truly disappear. Military radar, operating on different principles, can still detect objects without a transponder reply. Those military readings later revealed that the jet had not continued on its planned path northeast. Instead, it turned sharply back across the Malay Peninsula, heading west in radio silence. The aircraft then tracked out over the Strait of Malacca, flying for roughly another hour before leaving radar range entirely. After that, there was no confirmed radar data, only silence from the sky. From that point onward, the trail that investigators followed came not from radar or radio, but from space. The airplane's satellite communication box, known as the Satellite Data Unit, occasionally sent simple electronic check-ins to a satellite high above the Indian Ocean, operated by the company Inmarsat. These exchanges were automatic and very brief. Technicians call them handshakes. These handshakes did not include GPS coordinates or any direct position data, but they did leave behind two kinds of clues in the signal timing and frequency. The first clue is called the Burst Timing Offset, or BTO. It measures how long it takes for the signal to travel to the satellite and back, which tells investigators how far the aircraft was from that satellite at that exact moment. If you draw those distances on a map, they form curved lines called arcs, showing every possible location the airplane could have been at that distance. The second clue is called the Burst Frequency Offset, or BFO. It measures how much the radio tone shifted because of motion between the plane and the satellite, similar to how an ambulance siren changes pitch as it passes by. The BFO trend helps determine whether the airplane was moving northward or southward along those arcs. Together, the two clues are like breadcrumbs scattered across time. One gives distance, the other direction. After the turn back across Malaysia, the next important timestamp came at 2:25 a.m. local time, when the airplane made a fresh log-on to the satellite network. A new log-on often happens after a short power interruption or an internal reset of the satellite system. That reappearance showed the airplane was still functioning. Over the next several hours, it kept making these automated handshakes roughly once every hour. Twice during that period, the ground station even attempted to call the aircraft's satellite phone. In both cases, the aircraft's system acknowledged the call attempts, but no one picked up. Those satellite exchanges continued for hours, quietly proving that the airplane was still powered and flying long after the last radio contact. When analysts later aligned all the distance arcs and motion trends, they could begin to map out the flight's likely path. Teams from Australia's Transport Safety Bureau, Boeing, Inmarsat, and several other expert groups tested countless possibilities against the raw data. They checked which flight paths fit the distances and frequency changes while staying within realistic limits of the airplane's fuel and speed. The combinations that fit best all pointed away from mainland Asia and deep into the southern Indian Ocean. One particular moment in that long chain of signals drew even closer attention. At 12:19 a.m. UTC, which was 8:19 a.m. in Malaysia, the aircraft once again logged onto the satellite network after a period of silence. Investigators believed that this could have occurred when power was briefly lost and then restored by the deployment of the airplane's emergency wind-driven generator. In a Boeing 777, when both engines stop producing electricity, such as when fuel runs out, a small propeller-like device called the ram air turbine automatically drops into the airflow to generate enough power to keep key systems alive. The satellite box can then reboot, triggering one last log-on. After that final reappearance, the ground station sent several requests, but no more responses came. The timing fit perfectly with a plane that had stayed aloft through the night and ran out of fuel not long after sunrise. Once analysts had the broad southern target, oceanographers stepped in. Australia's National Science Agency, known as CSIRO, began running ocean drift simulations to predict where floating debris from a crash site in that region might eventually reach shore. Their work combined weather data, ocean current models, and field experiments. They even took a real flaperon, a type of movable control surface from another Boeing 777, modified it to mimic damage patterns seen in early debris photos, and released it into the ocean to study how such a part drifts in wind and waves. The results consistently pointed to a band of ocean centered near about 35 degrees south along the final satellite arc. That meant the area of highest probability for impact lay in a narrow stretch of the southern Indian Ocean. More than a year after the disappearance, physical proof finally surfaced. On July 29, 2015, beachgoers on Réunion Island, a French territory east of Madagascar, found a large piece of aircraft debris. It turned out to be a flaperon from a Boeing 777. French aviation investigators carefully examined it, tracing the serial numbers and manufacturing marks. On September 3rd of that year, French authorities confirmed the part belonged to the missing Malaysia Airlines flight. In the months and years that followed, more debris turned up on beaches and islands scattered across the western Indian Ocean, including parts of the right outboard flap and several other fragments. Investigators labeled pieces as confirmed when serial markings or construction details proved their origin beyond doubt. Others were described as almost certainly from the missing aircraft when their materials, paint layers, and damage patterns matched the Malaysia Airlines color scheme and no other known accident. The pattern of discoveries fit perfectly with the ocean drift models, reinforcing confidence that the main wreckage lay somewhere along that southern arc. For years, the world could only guess what really happened. Then the full report dropped, and its conclusion caught everyone off guard. What investigators found, and what they couldn't prove. In 2018, Malaysia released its official safety report after years of analysis with Boeing, Inmarsat, and international experts. It was 500 pages long, full of technical logs and timelines, but its main point was surprisingly blunt. The report said that the airplane's sharp turn off its planned route and the later changes it made could not be explained by random system failures alone. That meant the airplane didn't just drift off on its own. Someone inside had to make those moves. Still, the investigators stopped short of accusing anyone. They didn't name a person, and they didn't claim a motive because they simply didn't have enough proof. When the lead investigator spoke to reporters, he confirmed that those turns had been made by hand, not by autopilot. Naturally, attention turned to the two men in the cockpit. Were there any signs, any warnings in their past that could explain something like this? Those two were Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah and First Officer Fariq Abdul Hamid. Zahari had been with Malaysia Airlines since 1981 and was one of its most senior Boeing 777 captains. He was also a type-rating instructor and examiner, a pilot trusted to train and certify others. Over more than 3 decades of flying, he logged around 18,365 hours in the air and was known by colleagues as disciplined, calm, and deeply fascinated by aircraft systems. Outside work, he was friendly and sociable, with a reputation for helping younger pilots. Fariq, on the other hand, was near the start of his career. He joined the airline as a cadet in 2007, had accumulated roughly 2,763 flight hours, and was completing his final line check before full qualification on the Boeing 777. He was 27 years old, engaged to be married, and considered bright but still learning. Together, they represented a common cockpit pairing, an experienced captain guiding a junior first officer through his last supervised flights. Investigators examined every angle, training records, mental health, finances, and home life, and found nothing abnormal. No hidden debts, no erratic behavior, no signs of pressure or intent. That doesn't mean investigators could rule out a deliberate act. It just means the facts weren't strong enough to point a clear finger. Then came a long magazine story that reshaped how people saw the case. In 2019, journalist William Langevisha wrote a huge feature for The Atlantic. His conclusion was direct. The captain had likely flown the airplane to the very end. He connected several threads: the shape of the flight path, how the controls seemed managed, what was discovered on the captain's home flight simulator, and even patterns from older crash cases. The article was powerful and emotional, written in a way the public could follow, and it spread everywhere. But it wasn't an official conclusion. The Malaysian investigators never adopted it as fact. It was one journalist's interpretation, built on the same data everyone else had. The home simulator, though, did exist, and that's where the story gets uncomfortable. In 2016, Australian officials confirmed that data recovered from the captain's personal simulator included a saved route fragment that reached deep into the same part of the southern Indian Ocean where the real airplane is believed to have ended. Officials were careful when they talked about it. Yes, the fragment was real, but no, it didn't prove anything by itself. Pilots save all sorts of routes on simulators, sometimes for training, sometimes just to see what's possible. So while it was striking that one of the saved routes led into the same general area, it wasn't a smoking gun. Still, many found it hard to ignore. The question everyone asked was whether something mechanical could cause such a perfect mystery, but a purely technical failure doesn't fit easily. Airliners don't usually turn back across an entire country on their own and then fly for hours more. Systems don't switch off in perfect sync right after the crew signs off with air traffic control. If the pilots had been suddenly incapacitated, the plane would have followed its last programmed route or flown straight until it ran out of fuel, not zigzagged through waypoints. A person was definitely flying it, but who? That's where the data ends and speculation begins. A smaller clue added one of the few human traces from that night. In April 2014, Reuters reported that investigators believed the first officer's mobile phone had briefly tried to connect to a tower as the airplane passed near Penang on Malaysia's west coast. For that to happen, the phone had to be on, and the airplane had to be at just the right altitude and distance for the signal to reach land. It doesn't mean a call went through or a message was sent, only that the network saw a quick hello before the plane moved out of range. In a case almost entirely made of electronic silence, that tiny blink mattered. It was proof, however faint, that a phone on board was active at one point after the turnback. But that's all it proved. A brief handshake, nothing more. On March 24, 2014, Malaysia Airlines sent an SMS message to relatives of those on board. It read that the airline had to assume none of the passengers survived. It was sent just before the Prime Minister's announcement that the plane was considered lost in the southern Indian Ocean. Then there's the viral quote that refuses to die. "They're taking us somewhere. Signal is weak. Not sure we'll survive." You'll see it pop up in countless videos and posts, often claiming to be a message from a passenger moments before the crash. It sounds chilling, and that's exactly why it spreads. But no credible report, not one verified investigation file or major news outlet has ever shown evidence that such a text existed. Until someone presents a verifiable message log with timestamps and network records, that line remains a social media myth, not part of the evidence. And there's plenty of reason to be cautious. From the first week after MH370 disappeared, scammers were already using fake breaking news links about the crash to spread computer viruses. Authorities warned the public about it at the time. Ever since, the internet has churned out endless fake updates and hoaxes. from made-up debris photos to false black box transcripts. The passenger text fits right into that pattern. Analysts have kept working on the puzzle for years. Many are independent engineers, pilots, and data experts who publish their findings online. One of the best-known voices is Michael Exner, a satellite communications specialist who has studied the Inmarsat data since 2014. He appears often in mainstream coverage because he sticks to hard data, not speculation. In all his published analyses, and those of other well-known technical groups, none has ever mentioned a verified in-flight text message. Speculation could go on forever, but someone still had to find the plane. The new hunt for MH370. Point Nemo sounds like the sort of place a villain would build a secret base. The name gets tossed around all the time in connection with flight MH370, but it has nothing to do with it. Point Nemo is in the South Pacific, not the Indian Ocean. It's the spot on Earth farthest from any land. It's about 1,670 miles from the nearest shore, thousands of miles away from the part of the Indian Ocean where the missing jet is believed to have gone down. So Point Nemo is just another background noise in the story of the MH370. Interesting trivia, wrong ocean. What matters now is what's happening in the right ocean. After years of silence, stalled leads, and families left waiting, Malaysia has decided to put ships back in the water. In December 2024, the government reached an agreement in principle with the company Ocean Infinity to restart the deep-sea search. Ocean Infinity is the same outfit that led the most advanced sweep back in 2018. This time, the plan is different, tighter, cheaper, and focused. In March 2025, Malaysia's transport minister announced that the cabinet had signed off on the terms, a no-find, no-fee deal. Ocean Infinity will only receive payment if it locates the wreck. The payout, set at about $70 million, depends entirely on success. The new survey will cover roughly 15,000 square kilometers, around 5,800 square miles, of seabed in the southern Indian Ocean. That search zone is built around the same narrow lane of ocean identified years ago from satellite handshake data and refined by ocean drift modeling. The earlier searches covered a huge area, but still left gaps. Now the focus is on the next best section along that final arc, where the airplane's signals last fit the math. Ocean Infinity has a head start. When the company led its first expedition in 2018, its fleet scanned about 112,000 square kilometers, roughly 43,000 square miles, north of the original zone. Nothing resembling a debris field appeared. But that expedition also pushed the limits of what underwater robots could do at the time. Even with that success in mapping, deep ocean terrain is rough and complex. No team can sweep every square foot perfectly on a first pass. The new mission builds on the old data, tightening the grid, improving coverage, and filling in the blank spots that sonar shadows once hid. There's another reason optimism feels stronger this time. The technology has caught up. Ocean Infinity's system doesn't rely on one slow ship dragging a single sonar towfish. It uses a swarm of autonomous underwater vehicles, or AUVs, that can work at the same time. The specific machines, known as Hugin 6000s, are built by Kongsberg in Norway and can dive to about 19,700 feet. Each one can stay submerged for long missions, gliding a few yards above the seabed and mapping every contour with side-scan sonar. When they surface, they upload data and then head back down again. Over the past few years, Ocean Infinity has gone even further, building a new line of robot surface vessels called Armada. These ships can launch and recover AUVs without a massive human crew. A handful of technicians onshore can supervise multiple vessels at once, cutting costs and increasing total coverage time. In short, more robots stay in the water longer, with fewer pauses for refueling or maintenance. The next search will also revisit rough terrain that earlier missions couldn't fully scan. The bottom of the Indian Ocean isn't flat. It's full of canyons, cliffs, and ridges as deep as 3 miles. A piece of wreckage the size of an airplane wing can hide in a valley or behind a slope if the sonar angle isn't perfect. The plan this time is to rerun those ridges and shadow zones from different directions and to close the seams between sonar tracks. Think of it like mowing a giant lawn, not in neat separated stripes, but with overlapping passes to make sure no patch stays uncut. It's slow work, but that's the kind that actually finds things. Independent analysts who have followed the case since the beginning agree with this tighter focus. Engineer Victor Ianello, who writes about the case on his Radiant Physics site, has long argued that the most promising section lies along what's called the 7th arc, the curve that matches the last satellite handshake with the airplane. His advice to searchers has stayed consistent. Keep the hunt concentrated where the drift models and satellite math overlap, and don't waste time on far-flung alternatives. Now, before heading further into the new mission, it's worth clearing up another persistent buzzword: GPS spoofing. Spoofing is when someone transmits fake GPS-like signals that confuse aircraft navigation receivers into thinking they're somewhere else. In recent years, airliners flying over parts of Eastern Europe and the Middle East have reported spoofing or jamming incidents. Aviation regulators take it seriously. The European Union Aviation Safety Agency and the International Air Transport Association now share databases of incidents. The Federal Aviation Administration in the United States even issued formal advisories, called safety alerts for operators, warning pilots how to recognize and handle false positioning signals. All that shows the technology exists, but none of it connects directly to flight MH370. The fact that spoofing can happen doesn't mean it did here. There's never been a shred of evidence that the Boeing 777's navigation systems were hijacked remotely or tricked by fake signals. So what will the new search actually look like once Ocean Infinity's fleet arrives on site? First, the autonomous vehicles will run broad, overlapping side-scan sonar sweeps. The goal is to spot anything that stands out from the natural texture of the seabed. The AUVs will glide a few yards above the bottom, sending sound waves sideways that reflect back to form a picture. When a patch shows shapes or reflections that don't match rock or sediment, those coordinates are marked. The robots then resurface, send the data to the control vessel, or in the new setup to a remote operations center, and receive a refined mission plan. They dive again to rescan suspicious areas from a different direction or at a lower altitude. If the sonar images continue to show geometry consistent with wreckage, a field of metallic fragments or outlines similar to an aircraft fuselage, the team deploys high-definition cameras. These deep-water cameras can capture color video even in darkness miles below the surface. It's slow work, but it's the only way to confirm what sonar sees. A few sharp photographs of recognizable airplane parts are worth more than terabytes of sonar readings. Once the site is confirmed, recovery planning begins. The next phase would be retrieving the two recorders, the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder. Both are built to survive extreme pressure and can last decades sealed inside their housings. Recovery would require remotely operated vehicles equipped with robotic arms, but those tools already exist. Ocean Infinity and other subsea contractors use them regularly for oil, gas, and telecom projects at similar depths. Lifting debris from 3 miles down is hard, but it's within current engineering capability. The biggest challenge remains locating the target to begin with. Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more unbelievable stories.